All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Stefan Tanase. I'm part of the e-crime unit here at CSIS. And today I'm going to talk to you about the Magecart phenomenon, which is essentially supply chain attacks against payment processing as we know it. I hope everyone can hear me well, and I hope you can also see the slides well. I'm going to take you through a short intro, then an overview of the current threat with Magecart, a couple of insights from our own exclusive research, and then at the end we're going to finish it with an interesting case study that will show the human side of the supply chain threat in e-commerce. So to jump right in, a couple of words about CSIS. We're a private security company founded in 2003 in Denmark, but right now we span all across the globe. We have more than 100 employees with 20 different nationalities. We're the proud hosts of the cybercrime conference in Copenhagen every year, and we're proud to be featured in the latest Gartner for our world-known threat intelligence and outstanding reversing capabilities. So to go on with today's agenda, let's jump into the story. But first of all, I would like to ask you. Well, you can't really reply, but I'd like to ask you if you've ever heard of Willie Sutton. Willie Sutton is an interesting character. He was a bank robber in the 1950s, and he was very famous in the U.S. for robbing many banks. And Willie's story is pretty interesting because after he got caught by the FBI, a couple of journalists, they wanted to do an interview with him. And the main question the journalist had for Willie was, "Willie, why were you robbing banks?" And Willie's answer became history because his answer was so simple and so funny at the same time when he said, well, I was robbing banks because that's where the money is. And this quote, "because that's where the money is," essentially became Sutton's law, which is a law that is nowadays taught even in the medical schools. And it's a law that is helping doctors give patients quick diagnosis and treatment by essentially first considering the most obvious cases. Essentially, when you do a diagnosis, you should first consider and eliminate, by doing tests, the most likely hypothesis, which means that you should go where the money is, just like Willie Sutton. And of course, just like Willie Sutton was doing in the 1950s, cyber criminals are doing nowadays. They started doing cybercrime because that's where the money is, of course. But nowadays, we're not only focusing on cyber criminals. There's various types of threat actors being active in the cyberspace out there, ranging from cyber criminals to advanced nation-state sponsored attacks, to hacktivists who are politically motivated, and lately even cyber terrorists who can disrupt our critical infrastructure. And the reason why I wanted to have all these four categories of threat actors on one slide is because nowadays I think that all of them have some sort of financial interest, whether it's stealing money for their own gain or just disrupting the, let's call it, the enemy's financial system. I think every kind of threat actor nowadays has some sort of interest in attacking our banking system and our payment processing system. And of course, during these times that we're living in, the coronavirus times, online shopping has become more important than ever. And you can see this in the headlines all around the world right now. For example, e-commerce is driving China's stay-at-home economy nowadays. As people prefer to spend more time at home, they would rather order things online just to stay safe and try to limit the spread of the new coronavirus. And of course, this is happening all around the world. You can see it happening in Europe right now, and the US is coming next. So of course, when everyone is doing more online shopping, there's more opportunity for fraud. There's more opportunity for the bad guys to get their hands on our credit card numbers. And this is not a new trend. It's not a trend that started with the global pandemic. You can actually see it in the numbers in the past 3, even 4 years. There's been a real increase in card not present fraud losses at the same time where card present fraud losses have been on the decline. You can see this in the United States. The same thing is happening in Europe. On this slide, the CNP, the card not present fraud, is this yellow part which keeps increasing, and it's kind of obvious as more of our business and lives are moving online. More of the fraud is also going in that direction. So this is why we wanted to spend a few minutes this week to talk about Magecart, to give you a couple of insights into what's happening in the e-commerce space nowadays, and to give you some interesting info from what we've been researching lately at CSIS. So, Magecart. JavaScript skimmers are conquering e-commerce as we speak. As ThreatPost defines it, Magecart is essentially a loose affiliation of attack groups, and they've been responsible for some very high-profile attacks in the past year, targeting companies as big as British Airways or Ticketmaster to install credit card skimmers on their websites. This is something that is also called form jacking, where they usually inject some malicious code into the shopping cart and then proceed to steal the credit card data and then sell it on the underground forums. The Magecart threat became so significant that last year the FBI had to issue a warning to small and medium-sized businesses, but also government agencies who take credit card payments online, because of this whole e-skimming phenomenon. Bad guys are able nowadays to target these shopping carts, online payment gateways, and get their hands on our credit cards. So what is Magecart? Or better to say, what Magecart isn't. Magecart essentially is a supply chain attack against payment processing. It's a phenomenon. Magecart is not one specific threat actor. There's more than 30 groups who currently operate out there that we are trying to track here at CSIS. Magecart is not a specific technique. Various strategies are being used and deployed by cyber criminals to steal the credit cards. Magecart is not a malware family either. Various types of malware are being used in different stages of these attacks that I'm going to take you through in this presentation. And last but not least, Magecart is not infecting end users, and this is why this new threat is actually so novel, because it's a threat that targets the e-commerce platforms themselves. So before we jump into the technical details, I would just like to take a moment and tell you that if you have any questions or any ideas, feel free to open up the chat or the Q&A box and just type it in there. I won't be able to see it during the presentation, but at the end, we're going to take some minutes and answer any kind of questions that you might have. So the first case that I wanted to show you goes a little bit back in the early days of Magecart. It's a threat actor that was known as Magenta Core back then. And this was a group that was responsible for planting skimmers on thousands of websites in 2018. That's when they became active, and they grabbed headlines all over the world by infecting so many Magento installations. Magento, as you know, is one of the most common web application, open source and free, that can be used to set up an online store very quickly. These were the couple of domain names that were used by Magenta Core in the early days. And then in 2019, 1 year after Magenta Core started being active, they registered a GitHub account under the username Momo3333. So we're gonna call this guy or this group Momo from now on. And essentially they did this because the security industry was pretty quick in blocking and taking down the domain names that they were using for distributing the malicious code. So they figured that if they would host the malicious code on GitHub, then it would be much harder for antivirus companies and security companies to blacklist these domains, because you cannot just blacklist GitHub all of a sudden. That would break many things. So that's when Momo became famous for hosting his malicious scripts on GitHub, which is a legit platform for hosting code. After 1 year, if you check the Alexa top 1 million list of websites, you can still find more than 100 websites that are still serving the malicious JavaScript code from GitHub, even though it was taken down by GitHub 1 year ago. So I think this says a lot about the security of these websites, that, you know, even 1 year after malicious code injection, the website is still vulnerable. So what Momo started doing after his domain got closed and after his GitHub account got closed, he registered a .su domain. It was called magesource.su, and hosted in a data center in the Russian Federation. And basically, he started using the server to go on with his very aggressive e-skimming plan. He had a command and control server set there. The malicious code was hosted as magesource.su, and you can see here the whois data, momo3333 at protonmail.com, the same handle used by the threat actor mostly everywhere. And if you look nowadays at what kind of victims he's targeting, you can see that he's going after businesses mainly in Western Europe, things like hotel websites where you need to input your card for booking reservations, things like online shops for, you know, small and medium businesses, but basically victims all around, you know, Western Europe and even in the United States. This is how the injection looks like. It's usually just one line added in the HTML template of the online store. In this specific case, you can see there's two Magecart samples injected in the same store. Now, if you try to understand exactly how these websites get infected, there's many ways, but not many groups are leveraging malware, actual endpoint malware, to get their hands on these online stores. And Momo is one of these groups advanced enough to run both Windows and Linux bots that are essentially continuously brute forcing Magento installations around the world to try to crack them through weak login credentials, so weak usernames and passwords. For this part of the presentation, I'd like to talk a little bit about how the e-commerce supply chain works, because I think the biggest vulnerability nowadays doesn't come only from the technical side of things, but it also comes from the human side of things. So first of all, let's take a look at how the store gets infected, because nowadays it's easier done than said. First of all, attackers, they exploit vulnerable web applications. So there's vulnerabilities showing up all the time in web apps such as Magento, vulnerabilities that allow attackers to essentially do remote code execution on these web applications, essentially running their own malicious code inside the web store. Another way in which Magecart actors operate is by exploiting third-party or custom plugins that are included in the web shops. This is the supply chain part of the threat, because many times these plugins themselves are vulnerable and they can open the door essentially for attackers to inject malicious code in an application that would otherwise be secure. I would say the third way they get in is through weak admin credentials. So essentially brute forcing, like I showed you, like Momo is doing, or essentially, or also using email leaks with emails and passwords to try these credentials. And last but not least, endpoint malware, who goes directly for these passwords, stealing the password or stealing the authentication cookie, and then they can leverage this to get access to the admin area of the online shops. In some cases, the plugins being exploited can be anything. For example, this is a case where a GDPR plugin that shows that little GDPR notification on the bottom of your website, this was exploited to serve malicious Magecart code in one instance. This is another interesting example, an online shop from Germany, where we found at the same time two different Magecart groups that were stealing the credit cards from the customers, and also a third malicious script, which was a CoinHive cryptocurrency miner that was mining cryptocurrency in the browser. You can see this is one of the Magecart injections on this website. This was the second one, and yeah, the other one is the CoinHive miner. So you can see that some of these websites, because they belong to small, medium businesses, they're not very well maintained, and attackers are exploiting this actively. Now, of course, when you've got multiple groups of actors on the same online store, not all of them are as advanced as the others. So some of the Magecart scripts that we're analyzing are very simple, and you can even read them with your own eyes and understand them. Like you can see the one on the left, you can easily see what data it's trying to steal from the web page. You know, the first name, the last name, the email, telephone, postal code. You can see here the CC number, credit card ID, expiration date, expiration year, and essentially packing everything and posting it to a Magecart command and control server. On the right, it's a very similar script, but it's been obfuscated just to make analysis harder. So it's harder to see with your own eyes what the script is doing. And especially nowadays when many online shops are going for minified version of legit JavaScript, it's even harder just to take a look and to understand if this script is legit or this script is malicious. The platforms that these guys are targeting, they're doing indiscriminate targeting, essentially. They target whatever they can. They started with Magento. That's actually where the name Magecart comes from, like from Magento shopping cart, Magecart. But then they went on to target WordPress, WooCommerce, Shopify, Joomla, basically every CMS or every web application platform out there that can be turned into an online shop easily. But the interesting thing is that what we're seeing in the last year is Magecart attackers going after more complex platforms, such as the Salesforce Commerce Cloud, SFCC, or Demandware. Now, these platforms are the next level of e-commerce. These platforms are used by very big online shops, very big brands, international brands that have very popular online stores where they sell for the whole world. And you know, you would think that these different platforms should have different security measures, so to say. So a simple Magento installation shouldn't be vulnerable, or should be vulnerable compared to, for example, a Demandware installation. Because of course, you know, when you have a Magento website designed for a very small business, it's probably something that a freelance web developer that was contracted to do the work has done in his free time from his living room. That looks something like this that you can see on the left, compared to a Demandware installation, a Salesforce Commerce Cloud installation that is being developed by, you know, a very famous e-commerce agency that should know exactly what they're doing, and they shouldn't leave vulnerable code on the web shops. So the truth of the matter is that not all stores are created equal, but this doesn't mean that they cannot be targeted by Magecart. And I'm going to give you on this slide a case study based on a real incident response that we had in the past few months. And I think this is an interesting case study that shows the human side of the supply chain threat when it comes to e-commerce. The story starts in Canada, basically, where this very famous jewelry store that is a very old business, the kind of business that's been running for since before the internet was even a thing, decides that they want to move their business online also. So they want to create an online presence. They want to create a store where people can order jewelry online. The thing is, they don't have any kind of IT expertise. I mean, they've been selling jewelry, you know, street kind of stores since forever, but they're not really good at understanding how the internet works. So of course, this jewelry store hires an e-commerce agency for the purpose of building the website and maintaining the website, their web presence, so that their business can also benefit from the wonders of the internet. Now, this e-commerce agency is based in the United States, on the East Coast, but they're an e-commerce agency. They have no developers in the US office. That's actually why they have this R&D subsidiary in Europe. Where they have some people who are already allocated on some other projects, but they don't have headcount anymore for yet a new project. Still, the project needs to go forward. The contract has been signed, so they need to find a solution. And that's why they hire freelance contractors who are based in Eastern Europe, in countries like, you know, Romania or Ukraine. Unfortunately, these people, even though they are pretty well educated software developers, they might not work in the most secure conditions. You know, they don't have an IT manager for their home network. They don't have, many times they might not even have, you know, software licenses for the actual software that they use on their laptops. That's how it's happening in Eastern Europe many times. So these are people who can easily be targeted by threat actors. And during the incident that we had to analyze, this is actually what happened. One of the third-party contractors that the R&D subsidiary of this e-commerce agency hired for one specific e-commerce project had his computer infected by a very simple and common malware coming from the Far East. And those attackers most likely sold the access credentials that were grabbed from this unlucky guy's computer on the black market, where a Magento threat actor group bought them and then accessed the website. And I think this story is very good at illustrating how the supply chain can be vulnerable, even though no technical vulnerability is in place, because these developers, they usually have access to the admin interfaces, the admin backends of these very big websites. This case essentially was a Salesforce implementation for this jewelry store, and it was pretty hard to deal with from a business perspective, having a new website launch and then having to notify part of your customers that their credit cards have been stolen. So it's something that every online store should avoid. So just to summarize and to give you some key takeaways at the end, the things that I want you to remember is that supply chain attacks are on the rise. I'm not just talking about e-commerce here, I'm talking about the whole IT industry supply chain, but it's starting to become visible in the e-commerce space, where we are seeing cyber criminals not going for the banks directly, not going for the customers directly, but instead choosing the, let's say, road in the middle, where they actually go for the online stores themselves. The reason why the problem is so big nowadays is that the barrier for entry for attackers is very low currently. There's more than 500,000 Magento shops, Magento installations on online shops out there right now. And many of these shops, they were developed by someone a few years ago for a company that doesn't have any kind of expertise. So these shops might very well be not maintained, not updated, running vulnerable code, and putting their customers at risk. We're now witnessing an exponential growth year on year in the number of threat actors engaging in JavaScript scheming and targeting online shops. This is the reason why we're already seeing turf fights over the same victims. We're already seeing websites that are infected at the same time with multiple Magento groups out there. And again, this shows that it's a very dangerous threat and something that we need to deal with. And last but not least, this is a new challenge for banks and payment processors, because both banks and payment processors, they're pretty secure. You know, they have regulations in place. They have to do compliance. They have to do audits. They have to do pen tests. They have experience in dealing with credit cards. But at the same time, e-commerce vendors or the third-party companies that offer them plugins, that offer them freelance web developers, or that offer them, essentially the whole supply chain behind the e-commerce, they don't have these regulations in place. They don't have to do compliance. They don't have to do pen tests. Of course, the most responsible ones will do them, but the rest of them will not. And I think this leaves a door open for attackers to go after these credit card numbers and try to make a quick buck based on our financial system. So this being said, I'd like to thank you for paying attention. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm going to open the Q&A box in a minute, in a few seconds. I just want to say, stay safe, stay indoors, and do your shopping online until we solve this pandemic. So we got a few questions here. I'm not sure if there's also questions in the chat, but I can see the ones in the Q&A. So one of the questions is, how does CSIS protect their customers? So at CSIS, actually, the reason why we wanted to talk about the Magecart threat is because there's a great interest in this threat coming from the financial sector, coming from banks, for example, who want to limit the levels of fraud, especially in times like this when e-commerce is booming. And what we are doing currently with Magecart is we're monitoring all of the groups that we can. And what we're doing is we're offering a live threat intelligence feed for our customers, one with indicators of compromise, meaning all of the Magecart command and control servers that we managed to find. The other feed, and this is also an interesting feed, is a feed of the infected online shops that we are monitoring. We're constantly scanning millions of domain names every day to identify online shopping platforms and then to identify if these platforms are injected by Magecart. And by giving banks and financial institutions access to a feed of online shops that have been infected by Magecart, it helps them to do the common point of purchase analysis and essentially try to identify what other cards were used on the same place that was compromised. So this is what we're doing to protect our customers. Another question is, can I buy a plugin to protect my web shop? Of course, there are security tools and plugins to protect web shops. There are web application firewalls that you can put in place. There are things that can offer you mitigation about brute force attacks, from brute force attacks, and basically any kind of automated attack going after a web shop. But the problem is that most of these websites who become a victim of Magecart, they don't really take security seriously, and many times they might not even have IT people in place if they're a small and medium business. If they're a big business, they probably already thought about security, but it's happening through a third-party provider, the supply chain threat, and unfortunately, there's no plugin to protect you against the supply chain threat. The third question, and this is the last one that I have, if there's any other questions, now is the time to ask them. The question is, how can a regular user, a person who is non-technical, protect his or her card against Magecart, against Magecart when doing online shopping? So how can a regular user who is non-technical protect against Magecart? The problem is, even if you are technical, if you actually take a look at the source code of the HTML source code of the site, there's so many embedded scripts out there. There's so many third-party plugins that every site needs to operate. Some of them are already obfuscated. Some of them are already minified. It's impossible to see that the website is infected by Magecart with your own eyes. Of course, some security products like endpoint products will detect some of these scripts. Sometimes they will not detect them. So from my point of view, I think the best solution for a regular user when doing online shopping is to use disposable credit card numbers. There's some banks out there who are currently offering for retail customers the possibility to generate a unique credit card number for every online transaction that you do. So after you use the credit card once, basically you get a new credit card number to use for your next transaction. This means that even if the credit card number gets stolen and it gets into the wrong hands, it's already expired for that transaction, and everything is safe. Last question that we just got is, will you send the slides to participants? And yes, I think this is what we do with every webinar. At the end, Ruzana, who is our host here, she has a list of everyone who signed up, and you will get a PDF version of this presentation. All right. I think timing was also good. We still have 10 seconds until 10:30. So thanks everyone for joining. Thank you for spending time with us. Make sure to subscribe and to join our future webinars. We're trying to do this every week while we're trying to work from home. And stay safe, take care of yourselves and of your loved ones. All the best.